If you're ready to take your card making to the next level, you're in the right place. Today I'm sharing 14 easy DIY card making hacks that will help you get more out of your supplies and make the whole process way more efficient and fun. You might have seen some of these tricks before, but I promise there are a few like hack numbers 5, 11, and 13 that will totally surprise you with their simplicity but incredible efficiency and precision when crafting your designs. If you haven't watched my first couple of videos with over 30 crafty hacks, no worries, you can catch them later. For now, let's jump into these next level ideas that will help you create with more confidence while saving you time and frustration. Let's dive in. In this first hack, I'll show you how to create a bunch of stamped sentiments that are perfectly centered on narrow banners or labels. This is a huge time saver when you're creating sentiments in batches or just trying to align them perfectly on narrow labels. I'm using these all-to-new sentiment stamps to demonstrate this hack I picked up from the incredible Jennifer McGuire. I may have improvised a couple of things to make this technique my own, but it's largely her idea. I'm also using 2 banner dies from Gina K's Master Layouts 2 set for this. You'll notice I already have a couple of banner templates cut out. I like to store these templates with the stamp and die set, so I don't need to cut them over and over again. To get started, I'm using a plain sheet of copy paper in my MISTI, and I'll adhere it down onto the sticky mat inside so it doesn't shift, and first I'll stamp directly on it. Next, I'll place the banner templates over the stamped impressions, centering them carefully. I like to use a bit of tape runner to hold the templates in place so they won't move while I work. Now I'll cut a few strips of cardstock wide enough to fit the banner dies and cut out a few banners that I'll stamp on. Quick tip here. If you need to cut out the same shape multiple times like I'm doing with these banners, you don't need to reposition the tape every time. Line up and stick your dies down once and you can reuse that setup again and again to save on time and of course the hassle. I'll cut a few off camera and I'll be right back. And by the way, I'm saving these strips from the negative die cuts and I'll show you what I do with them later. I try not to waste anything, especially paper. All the banners are cut, so I'll just stick my dies on the die catcher for now and I'll move on to the stamping. I'm now fitting the die cut banners into the corresponding template cutouts. But before I stamp, here's another little trick. Even though I've already aligned the templates nicely over the stamped sentiments, I'll still double check the alignment by using a scrap piece of acetate first. This ensures the sentiment is actually centered and straight before stamping on the actual die cut. This genius trick is courtesy of Gina K of Gina K Designs. I'll just clean the acetate with some alcohol and move on to the actual stamping. The stamps are sticky, so it pulled out the die cuts from the template, so I'll add a tiny bit of glue inside the cutout so it prevents the die cuts from shifting, and later I'll use a glue eraser to remove any leftover adhesive so I can store the templates back with my dies. Look at how quick that was. Now I have a nice little stash of ready-to-go sentiments. I'll clean up my stamps and use the glue eraser to tidy up both the copy paper and the banner cutouts. It's a super efficient way to batch create sentiments and ensure perfect alignment every time, especially on narrow strips. Here's a little bonus tip for stretching your supplies. Remember I saved the negative pieces from the die cuts? I'll chop them down into strips, and instead of reaching for foam tape, I'll use these strips to add dimension behind the banners. It's a great way to minimize waste and get that popped up look. Which brings me to the next hack on why you should be saving all your nonstick paper. Keep watching. The very first way to use nonstick paper is for gluing, and these papers really make cleanup a breeze afterwards. I save all my backing sheets from various adhesives because they're perfect for all my sticky business. So I'll use the nonstick backing paper to protect my work surface while I glue these paper strips down and add them behind the banner sentiments. Here I've added strips of cardstock behind the sentiment banner to create dimension. You can layer as many as you like. I use 2 here, but you can definitely add a third or even more lift. And just like that, I've created clean, dimensional sentiment banners with minimal waste and maximum efficiency, and I don't even have to wipe the glue off my glass mat since I was working on a nonstick surface. In this next hack, I'll show you how you can use nonstick paper to stick all kinds of things, plus how to make your own custom sizes of foam tapes. Let's start with the foam tape. If I were to handle just the foam tape by itself, it's sticky and kind of a hassle, especially when I'm trying to hold longer strips and cut them neatly. But when I place the foam tape onto a sheet of nonstick paper, I can actually make this quick and efficient. You see how easy it is to cut long, clean strips and create tiny, narrow pieces in custom sizes as well. This makes it so convenient when you need just a little pop of dimension in specific spots. And here's the best part. I can peel the backing off this tiny piece of foam tape and just stick it right back onto the nonstick paper so I don't lose it. Everything stays together on a single sheet, and it's such a handy way to store your foam tape pieces until you're ready to use them on your project. Isn't that so simple? Now, here's another great use for nonstick paper: creating wax beads. I used to make wax seals for my custom card orders on Etsy, and I'd often have leftover wax in the spoon after sealing. Instead of wiping the spoon and wasting that extra bit of wax, I'd just drop the excess directly onto a nonstick sheet and let it cool. Once it dries, it lifts off the paper easily, and I store all those extra wax dots in a little container. They're ready to go whenever I need a quick embellishment. I'll be honest, I don't always remember I have them, but when I do, they're perfect for card projects or even in my journals. Now, I'll do something similar, but this time with pops of color from scrapbook.com. It's a type of liquid embellishment and looks like enamel dots or color drops once they dry. You can use any kind of liquid drops like this, and they all take forever to dry. But if you make them ahead of time on a nonstick sheet, you can save yourself the wait when you're in the middle of a project. Create the dots and let them dry completely, and store them until you're ready to use them. Then you can glue them onto your cards with a bit of liquid adhesive. What you're seeing me do here is squeeze out a few drops in different sizes. Now, here's a neat trick I learned from Lucy Patrick, fabulous crafter. When you squeeze out little drops, they often come out with little pointy peaks. They're not quite smooth or rounded, but if you just tap the nonstick paper gently, those peaks will disappear and the drops will settle into perfectly smooth, round shapes. You can see it here up close. Those pointy tops are pretty obvious right after squeezing the drops out, but once I tap the sheet a few times, the points vanish, and I'm left with beautifully rounded dots. The nonstick paper I was using was a little too thin, so I grabbed a piece of cardstock to put underneath and give it a bit more support. That really helped keep the paper steady while tapping. And now you can see those dots have smoothed out completely and they look so polished. I'll set this whole sheet aside to dry, and I'll come back to it later in the video to show you how easily the dried embellishments lift off the nonstick sheet. You can store them in any little container and pop them onto your next card project whenever you're ready. If you've ever attached a panel crookedly onto your card base, and I seem to be doing that all the time, the next hack and tip number 13 will be game changers, so please keep watching. But before we jump in, I want to add a quick disclaimer. This trick only works with foam tape, and I haven't tested it with panels that were glued down using liquid adhesive, so please just keep that in mind. So here's the scenario. I've completed a card panel, backed it with foam tape, and I'm ready to stick it onto the card front. But then, oops, it gets skewed. Now, if you've ever tried peeling off a crooked panel that's backed with foam tape, you know how frustrating that can be. It's nearly impossible to lift it without tearing or damaging the card front or the card base. But here's the hack. Grab your heat tool. This hack will also work on foam tape that's been stuck down for quite some time. Apply heat to the foam tape, both from the front and from the back. You'll notice that the panel lifts off super easily without ripping the card base or the panel itself. The panel may look a little curled at first, especially if you pull it off quickly like I did here. But if you heat it a little longer, the panel will automatically start lifting off and it won't curl as much. But once you adhere it back down and press it properly, it flattens out just fine. I actually discovered this by accident. I was heat embossing on a completed panel that was already mounted with foam tape, and I noticed the whole thing coming off. That's when the light bulb went off. Heat loosens the foam tape adhesive. And let me tell you, this hack has saved quite a few card panels since then. Now let me show you another hack using the exact same card front and card panel. When trying to stick down the panel, you'll see it's a little tricky because the card isn't completely flat. I've already burnished it a bit, which helps, but aligning the panel while trying to hold the card shut is kind of a juggling act. This next trick is something I learned from Cathy Zielske, and you'll find it incredibly useful, especially if you don't have a magnetic glass mat with magnets to help you out. Mostly I do use my magnetic mat and use my magnets to hold the card front flat, but there are times, like when I'm photographing a card, where I do need to keep the card shut without using magnets on top. So here's what I do. I take a piece of low-tack tape, and this could be painter's tape, washi tape, and roll it up into a little sushi roll. Stick that inside the card to hold it closed, and that's it. It keeps the card shut while you're lining things up, arranging your embellishments, or photographing a project. Super simple, and it really helps prevent errors during assembly or photography. You know how we often try to stack up layers of sentiment die cuts but can't get them to align perfectly? In this hack, I'll show you how to do that without breaking a sweat. I've saved the negative die cut for the word happy so I can add layers to it. And the easiest way to do that is to place the die cuts back into the negative space and layer on top of them. Everything fits into the groove perfectly that way, and alignment is so much easier. Once I've applied the glue and placed a layer on top, I like to make sure the letters don't get stuck around the edges. That's why I'll remove the letters from the negative die cut after gluing every layer. In the next one, I'll show you how to align an intricate die cut without causing it to stretch or become distorted. I have a couple of challenges here. One is to adhere the scripty and intricate die cut without distorting it, and the second is to get it perfectly centered on this narrow strip of pattern paper. To help with placement, I'm using the negative die cut as a guide again. I'll try to center the die cut as best as I can, but since I can't see through the negative, I want a bit of wiggle room before I commit to the placement. That's why I'll apply a tiny amount of adhesive with a tape runner, which is perfect for temporary positioning, and I can pull the die cut off easily if I need to reposition it. And you can see how the negative helps me get the spacing just right. Once I'm happy with it, I'll remove the guide to check the centering. Since it looks pretty good, I'll come in with liquid glue for the final stick down. And since I've already used the tape runner, it won't shift the die cut, and I can glue down everything without having to move it again. The next couple of hacks are all about getting nice and crisp impressions, whether you're using your BetterPress system or just a stamp on an acrylic block. Let's take a look. Now, this BetterPress hack I learned from Carissa Wiley, and honestly, it's a game changer. I'll use the press plate to create a sentiment right on this card panel. Now, with the BetterPress plate, sometimes you may need to press it more than once to get a well-inked impression. So here's what I'm doing. I'm aligning the card panel onto the BetterPress chase, that's the magnetic mat. I use a tiny bit of tape runner to tack down the cardstock lightly. This makes it easy to lift up later and it keeps everything in place. Then I align the sentiment plate as accurately as I can, ink it up, and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. Now, here's the issue. The magnetic shim in the base can shift during the die cutting process, and if it moves, you can end up with a double impression. Not ideal. So here's the solution Carissa came up with, and that is to use some kind of adhesive tape to hold the magnetic shim down into the BetterPress base. That way it stays completely still as you run it through the die cutting machine, even multiple times. This gives you a crisp, clean result every single time without the risk of shadows or ghosting. Now I'll bring in my Spellbinders machine and run it through. As expected, the first impression was a bit uneven, so I'm inking it up again. I'm using Scrapbook.com's metallic rose gold ink, by the way, which is stunning. It has that elegant coppery rose gold finish. On my second try, I accidentally flipped the plate while trying to give you a close-up look, and the result was a jumbled sentiment. But I'm not going to waste that cardstock since this is just a demo. So I cleaned off the plate and reset everything to try again. By the way, here's another tip. Those BetterPress plates are tight, and I always struggle to lift them off without ruining my nails. So I use strong neodymium magnets to lift them off easily. Works like a charm. Okay, realigning, re-inking, and this time I'm being mindful and not flipping the plate. I ran it through the Platinum 6 again, and now I've got a beautiful, crisp, and well-inked impression. If I wanted to, I could even run it a third time and it would still be clean because the tape is holding that plate perfectly still. No shifting, no shadowing, just perfect. Now, this next hack is brilliant, especially if you're working with tiny stamps. You know how frustrating they can be, right? Because they rock when you place them on an acrylic block and try to press them down. I wish I could remember who I saw this from. Possibly this was demonstrated by G of Creative Moments by G, but the trick here is to add a second stamp to the acrylic block. The second stamp acts as a balance, so the block doesn't rock when you press it down. I'm not inking the second stamp, of course. It's just there to keep everything steady. I'll stamp with my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, one of my favorites, and because the block is balanced, there's no rocking. The impression is sharp and crisp. No ghosting, no smudges either. I'll show you again with a different stamp. This time I'll create a pattern using a smaller image. If I stamp without that balancing stamp, do you see how the block wobbles? So the image won't be clean. But when I place a second stamp near the bottom of the block, it balances everything out. So I'll stamp again. Perfect impression, no wobble, no blur, just clean results. This is another hack I saw on a crafter's channel, and unfortunately I forgot to note down who it was. So my apologies to whoever came up with this idea, but hats off because this is fantastic. I want to cut a frame from mirror cardstock, and every time I try to position the dies, they shift. The moment I lift my fingers, they move. Super frustrating. But here's the trick. You know those fridge magnets you get in the mail from real estate agents and dental clinics? Save them. Or maybe you have a magnetic board or sheet or even a magnetic cutting plate. Just place it on your work surface and pop your dies on top. The die won't shift unless you deliberately move it, right? Now I can position my dies symmetrically, tape them down, curl the sheet back on itself to get a grip, and then position it on the cardstock. Pass it through the die cutting machine, and the result is a flawless frame. Do you see how perfect this is? Now, before I go to the next hack, I wanted to show you the embellishments I made earlier on nonstick paper with pops of color. Now that they're dry, look at this. They lift right off with just a little nudge. Because of the nonstick backing, nothing gets stuck, and you can store these easily. Speaking of storage, I love Tic Tacs. I buy a lot of them. And when the containers are empty, I use them to store bits and bobs, especially embellishments. Do you have any hacks, tips, or tricks you use in your crafting? Please let me know in the comments. And if I create another crafty hacks video, I'd love to share those hacks and give you full credit for that. Okay, the next couple of hacks honestly blew my mind when I saw them, and I picked up both from Maymay over at Maymay Made It. So shout out to her because these have been game changers for my card making workflow since. I'll link to her channel in the description because she has some amazing videos. So here's what this is. I cut out a bunch of card panels using some craft, and this speckled off-white cardstock I had a ton of. I wasn't sure how much I'd need, but it actually didn't take that much to get a really solid set ready. I remember the A2 took only a couple of these sheets, and for the A7 set, I think it was a sheet and a half of each. Now, each of these panels is cut using 1/4 inch reductions for the want of a better word, meaning every panel is a 1/4 inch smaller than the one before it. That gives you an 1/8 of an inch border all the way around. I cut them down from the largest to the smallest for convenience. You can use them as consecutive mats or even skip sizes to play with different layering looks. So for example, with an A2 size card base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, I've cut the next panel at 4 by 5 1/4, giving me that 1/8 inch border all around. Then if I want to double mat, I can go down another 1/4 inch to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. You can keep going like that depending on your design. Now, technically, you can go even more precise with 1/8 inch changes to get a 1/16 inch border, but I personally find that to be too narrow. 1/4 inch steps give me just the right visual balance, so I didn't bother with an 1/8 of an inch increment. What I love about this set of templates is it takes out the guesswork. I'm no longer cutting up tons of cardstock just to see what looks good, because I can just grab my pre-cut panels, test out different combinations, and know exactly what I'm getting before I reach for my expensive cardstock. I keep these handy anytime I'm planning a new card design. I use my design elements on the panel and figure out the arrangement and then reach for the final cardstock that I'll be using for the project. I also have a set like this for 5 by 7 cards using the exact same system, 1/4 inch reductions. And you can, again, go even smaller if you want to, but for me, this is good enough. This next hack will forever eliminate skewed card panels, so please keep watching. This hack works beautifully with the panel hack I just showed you, and it's from Maymay again. This one helps when you're trying to adhere a panel with an even margin all around, because sometimes, no matter how carefully you try to line it up, it does end up skewed and off-center. So here's the trick. I'm using Pixie Tape for this. My longest panel size is usually 7 inches for a 5 by 7 card, so I'll measure out about 8 inches of tape. I'll place it as straight as possible onto my glass mat. Next, I'm trimming the edges with a ruler and craft knife to make sure everything's straight and even. Once I have my tape in place, I'll take a ruler and draw a line on it with a Sharpie, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Be careful here, I tried using a gel pen first and it smudged, so stick with something permanent. I also drew a 1/4 inch line on the other side of the strip using a red Sharpie, just to keep the two guides separate. Pixie tape is pretty low tack, which is good because it won't damage your paper, but I still like to de-tack it a bit more, especially when working with delicate panels. So once you've got those lines marked, this is how the magic happens. If you want a 1/8 inch border around your card panel or mat, then you just line up the 1/8 inch pencil mark with the edge of your craft panel carefully and press the tape down. One on the side and one along the top edge. Since the tape is longer than the panel, it also holds it steady while you're working. Then when you're ready to adhere your top panel, you simply butt it up against the tape on the top and the side, and you'll have a perfect 1/8 inch margin every single time. If I wanted a 1/4 inch border, I line up the 1/4 inch side of the tape. This hack has been a lifesaver since I found it, especially when I want those perfectly even borders, which is most of the time. And to save the tape, I'll just stick it to the back side of my magnetic mat and store it there. And it's ready to reuse whenever I need it. So you can see now how those two hacks work hand in hand, having the pre-cut panels to test your layouts and using the tape guide to get your placement just right. All right, now here's the final hack, and if you're into fun folds, this one's going to be huge. Let's say you want to score a piece of cardstock diagonally from corner to corner. That can be tricky, especially with thicker cardstock, because it's hard to see or feel the scoring track underneath. It's super easy to go off track. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of washi tape and lined it up exactly with one of the scoring grooves on my scoreboard. This gives me a perfect visual guide, so I know I'm scoring along the right path. All you have to do is place one corner of your cardstock against the top edge of the tape and the opposite corner down against the bottom edge. Then you score right along that groove. It's super precise. For thicker cardstock, I like to score on both sides to break down the fibers a bit and help the fold. And I'll leave that washi tape on my scoreboard, doesn't get in the way at all, and it'll be there ready for the next fun fold project. If you found these tips helpful, I have another video with a lot more hacks, so make sure you check out this video here.